and welcome again to BRAIDAR, the Business of Beauty. My name is Jade Mparu, and I am your host for this radio show. Now, I remember last week we talked about digital beauty, we talked about virtual worlds, and the fact that a lot of brands in the fashion space, and even outside of that space as well, they're tapping into that whole metaverse scene and that whole customization of avatars and omni-channel and all of that stuff to kind of increase their brand salience and also to tap into that sense of identifying and expressing your sort of individualism through the brand as a medium and just engaging with the brand on that kind of level, that like creative and sort of self-actualization level. So that was a really interesting discussion, and I know that I gave some teasers at the end of that episode as to what we'd be talking about today. So without further ado, we're going to hop right into it, and today we're going to be talking about dolls. And these are not like the virtual dolls I was talking about last week in terms of like the virtual worlds and the dress-up games and that whole customization, but this is more so the actual like plastic dolls. So when you think about that, you think about like Barbie, obviously, you think about Bratz, and you might even think about some other doll brands that are less sort of ubiquitous, but nevertheless very impactful. And I think it's really interesting to kind of sit down and analyze how these doll brands kind of feed off of each other, and then how they sort of inform the wider fashion landscape in terms of like what is considered trendy and popular fashion by what demographic, and also crucially when it's considered trendy. So in that respect, we'll be looking at how the fashion from doll brands such as Bratz in the early 2000s and mid 2000s has, how that's sort of impacted the current fashion trends, and at least the fashion trends from the past, let's say, 5 years and ongoing, how that's manifested itself in the fashion trends of the generations that grew up on Bratz dolls, and kind of wanted to tap into that sort of, creative expression. So I think Bratz is a good place to start, because it's interesting how before like 2001, when the first line of Bratz dolls was released, it was more so just Barbie that was reigning in terms of like when you think of a fashion doll as opposed to like maybe a baby doll or some other form of toy, it was always Barbie that was in people's minds. And with that sort of brand salience and ubiquity, it also means that it's always one look that's in people's minds. Now, I'm not saying that before 2001 there was no, like, for example, no black Barbie, there was no Barbie with like different face molds or different hairstyles and all sorts of things. Like Mattel definitely were putting out like Barbies of different nationalities and ethnicities, even Barbies like friends, you know, Skipper, Tracy, Midge, all of those, and and her sisters as well. Sorry, I think Skipper's her sister, but you get what I mean. Her sisters were like the dolls that would be like toddler dolls or preteen dolls, and then her friends would be obviously like the same stature and build as her, so you could kind of like swap the clothes between Barbie and her friends like Teresa and all them. So but I think what was particularly striking is that Bratz sort of came at the fashion doll market with a different angle. So you know how, and this is why it's such an interesting topic, because what I'm about to say is based on my perception of Barbie from a specific time period and also from a specific perspective, as in I obviously was not born when Barbie was like created in like the mid 20th century, and I wasn't around when like in the 80s, you know, all those kind of like Barbie like play sets and doll lines and rare dolls and stuff like that. But from my own perspective, of that like early 2000s time, not 2001 obviously because I wasn't born, but Barbie in that era, from what I can like recollect and like gather from my research, even if you look at the Barbie movies, like for example, if you look at some of the older CGI animated Barbie movies, they have this frame narrative where at the beginning it will be Barbie and like Kelly, who's like a little girl, like maybe 5 or 4. Barbie and Kelly will be doing something like very everyday. Maybe it's like ballet lessons, maybe it's painting, just painting together. And the whole frame narrative to like open up the movie will be about how, for example, maybe Kelly is facing a challenge in the activity that they're doing, and she's looking to Barbie as that sort of role model figure, but also aspirational figure, almost like a directly comparing her output to Barbie's output. And I think that's quite interesting because those films are essentially framed as Barbie's like telling Kelly a story, and the story is the movie. So if you think about Barbie, Barbie as Rapunzel, for example, I think that was one where this happened, and it would be like Barbie using the story to tell Kelly why, you don't have to be like me, just be yourself. Or things are not always as easy or as perfect as they may seem, and you can look at this girl's story to see how that is a case. And so I think it's very interesting how she was positioned as this sort of not omniscient but highly sort of experienced and almost I'd say near omniscient, in the sense that she has the perspective of this, like not only the world in which they are like occupying, like her and Kelly, in terms of something that resembles a real world, but also her knowledge of this like magical other dimension in which the stories take place, like Barbie the Pegasus, Barbie like just you get what I mean, right? 12 Dancing Princesses, for example. So it's very interesting how, from that perspective, Barbie's sort of branding as more as a character first and then as a doll second is sort of based on that role model function or maybe archetype, that aspirational, it's like big sister, big cousin sort of position that she occupied in the way that the brand wanted to present her to consumers. And maybe that's based on their research and what they found out about the target audience at the time, like whatever cohort was in the age bracket that they're targeting at the time. Maybe their research revealed that that's how they that's the way in which they respond to Barbie, and that's the way that they should position Barbie in order to get the maximum like profit out of that cohort, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's a key thing, because I'm going to bring that up in sort of conjunction to other later doll brands, and you'll see like a distinction. But the fact that that was what was going on was reflected in the movies, reflected in the doll, like actual doll lines and like fashion packs that were released and like play sets that were released. They kind of centered on this realism, but aspirational, almost like rose-tinted realism, maybe. Like it's almost like they were asked, not directly, but you could sort of infer that perhaps it could be compared to asking the target audience, cast your mind into the future, little 5-year-old kids, even though you're not that knowledgeable about the world, but from what you can glean from like popular culture and TV and movies, you can kind of pick up on certain iconography, and then that iconography, we're going to map it onto Barbie's life. And through that, you can see yourself, in the future, or you can see what your future could be. And I think that's really interesting because you can see it reflected in the actual quality of the play sets in terms of the way they would mold the food, for example, or the furniture or the decorations. It would be, they'd use realistic colors, they'd use details, they'd use actual fabric for things like curtains and other items like that. And I think it's that level of attention to detail and realism injected into play that further, reinforce this idea of of like aspirational rose tinted realism, but with a Barbie twist. So it's like it's still youthful, it's still fun, it's still fashionable, but it's like it's real life but cute, And I think that's something that that kids responded to, and I think personally that's one of the like conceptualizations of like commoditized like fashion dolls and things like that. That's one of the ways in which you can conceptualize it that I think is like very interesting, because I love like miniature things that have like real world details and like I like that approach. Not exclusively, of course, but I just think that's quite cool. So you've got that context, right? You've got that status quo of like Barbie is sort of dominating the scene, and even in her like Barbie magazine, they reinforce this idea of Barbie's living her life. She's doing all sorts of things. It doesn't even have to be like she's an astronaut, a president, and a scientist at the same time. It's like Barbie went on a camping trip with her friends in her convertible, and it's like everyday things that are cute, but somehow easy enough for a child to understand that it's aspirational. And then you get Bratz. You get this kind of approach from a whole other perspective, which is more like, okay, Barbie's here. Barbie is a sort of well-established young adult. She's sort of connected. She's accomplished, and she's still approachable. But how about, and this is just like creative license here, because I don't know if this is what the creator was thinking when he drew up the Bratz girls, but Bratz taps into a more directly relatable like model for fashion doll in terms of like maybe first and foremost their age. So Bratz, the first like line of Bratz, the dolls came with like little descriptions of what they're like. So you would see like they're obviously the fashion they're wearing in the box. You'd see the little accessories, and then you'd see the description, and it would be like, "Hi, my name is Jade, or my name is Chloe or Sasha, and I like this. I'm into these hobbies, and my style is this or it's that." It's like it'd be like, my style is boho, or my style is like trendy with a bit of edge, or my style is like cutesy and inspired by X or inspired by Y. And I think in doing that, what happens is that the girls kind of got like a life of their own, if that makes sense. And not just a life of their own, but a life that mirrors real life in terms of what real high schoolers, like what they're going through, what they're interested in, and how they choose to express themselves. It's more like a mirror to the actual world that the kids and the target audience are living in, rather than like a rose tinted like window into another world that they could live in their imagination, or in some kind of ideal future, if you understand. It's more like right here, right now, like holding a camera to the streets of whatever town or city the kids are in, and seeing the kids like just what they're wearing and how they're interacting with each other, and how they're expressing themselves in this point in time. And even going back to those descriptions, the Bratz, like the team behind Bratz, made sure to kind of pin those identities to school as well. So talk about like, oh yeah, after school, I hang out with my friends, I enjoy this, and like, or I love going to this place which is near this place. So it's like, it's almost like pinning the whole concept of like school life, and how for like preteens and teens, their sort of life and their beginning of like actualization is sort of, it's all around like the school hours, and it's around like studying, and it's around school life and school cliques and hierarchies and things like that, and friendships. So I think in doing that, it was very smart in terms of, again, like that mirror, or that like lens onto like what's actually happening on the street, on the playground, or on the front steps of the school, or like, yeah, it's just a bit more, it's just a bit more linked in that way. And so that's one aspect of how they tapped into a more immediate relatability. But another aspect is the actual fashion. So if you think about let's take Sasha, for example. Sasha's outfit in the first edition Bratz lineup, Sasha's outfit is like a knit, there's like an orange knit with some denim, like really wide trousers, and I think she has a hat too with like two sort of bubbles, like tassel type thingies. And I think, again, the fact that like tapping into that realism in terms of materials, in terms of attention to detail, like hemming the trousers, or having the knit like sort of that tactile, the tactile quality of having like a knit top or hat, and things like that just lend it a bit of just a bit of, I'm not even sure what word can properly describe it, but it's creating their world more effectively than if you just, like, for example, had a doll that had a simple dress with like just a printed pattern on it, and it's just a simple like A-line dress, for example. That's not really communicating the personality of the doll, and it's not really communicating the world in which the doll lives. In making the fashion pieces more tactile by actually using those materials that the item of clothing signifies. For example, jeans signify denim, and they actually use like a denim-like material. That adds to the world building of Bratz. And the world building, again, that relatability is what I think attracted so many like customers within, not customers, but kids, within the target audience. Because it's kind of a long story, but a lot of times in products that are meant for children, the customer is not the same as the user, in terms of the customer will probably be the parent, but the user will be the child. So but it's not too important for right now. So so that is, that's kind of that distinction. So we've talked about the world building in terms of the descriptions of the girls, and the setting the scene of their lives, and then we talked about how the fashion like pulls that into, like, puts that into practice, and is a tangible sort of expression of that world building, and that like making it real and making it relatable for the users. And so I think a third aspect would also be the actual molds of the doll. And when I say molds, I mean basically like, you know how if you've ever kind of done like maybe design technology class in school, you'll see how if you have like a mold for making something out of plastic, you have to pour the plastic into that mold, and then like it sets into the mold, and then once you pop it out of the mold, the plastic has that shape. So molds in the case of like fashion dolls is just like the shape of like the head or the body or the feet or like the hands, and like articulation and that kind of thing. Although you can't like make articulation in the mold, but that's not important. That's just that is, yeah, that's just like pedantic. But anyway, what I mean by that is really the fact that Bratz are so visually striking is due to their mold being different from Barbie. And in that, obviously, they've got like larger heads, and not just larger, because you could kind of say that, like, if you just say they've got larger heads, you might think a Barbie head but bigger, like still oval. But no, they've actually got like round heads, almost like elliptical heads. And I think that gives them another quality and a distinction, like in terms of like not just who they are in terms of brand recognition, but what they actually are is fundamentally different from Barbie, as in what Barbie stands for and what Barbie has come to represent as a fashion doll. I'm not even talking in terms of like sort of standards, even though that's an important part of the conversation, and it's very like, it's very true to kind of point these things out. But I just mean in terms of like, it's almost like it's kind of hard to encapsulate with just words and not like a sort of example to demonstrate physically to you or visually to you that you can like touch and see. But the fact that it's almost like they're coming from a different world. Yeah, I think that's a really good way to say it. Or like different universe. Yeah. So you've got like the like round heads, and within that you've also got huge eyes. So the Bratz eyes compared to the Barbie eyes, in terms of the actual like makeup styling, I think for the time in which Bratz came out, like 2001, the Bratz doll like eye makeup, like screening, as in the way they print the colors and like the designs onto the molds, like the plastic. So the makeup screening on the Bratz, I think, was very sort of distinct from that of Barbie, because obviously like Bratz have this sort of attitude and this sort of like almost more grown up makeup than Barbie. And this is just like a very generalized way to say it, because it's not as though the makeup automatically makes these dolls, which are meant to be like in high school, older than a doll that's like a young adult. But it's just, I think it's the connotations of the makeup, and also the like the fact that it's different implies a certain like non-conformity to like the act of wearing that makeup and that style. So in that you've got a kind of like rebellious or like up and coming sort of new, like almost like, yeah, countercultural, that's the word I'm thinking for, like counter Barbie cultural makeup screening. So that combined with like the different proportions, like obviously their feet are huge, which allows them to highlight like the shoes as an integral part of the fashion like looks, and the fact you can like detach their feet as well to like change shoes, that's different functionality for actually like engaging and playing with the dolls. So in these ways, like, and also the actual torso of the Bratz dolls is like very small compared to like their legs and their arms and obviously their heads. So again, you've got that kind of like different, it's like a different person or different universe that you're engaging with, and a different way in which you're engaging with fashion and like the act of like mixing and matching and creating and like expressing yourself or making a character or a world in like the playing with the dolls. So I think that was part of what kind of made it have such a splash, because yeah, I think it just, again, it tapped into what the audience is actually going through, or rather, like, on one hand, what the audience is going through in terms of like the older end of their target audience, by there I mean like the doll industry, but also in terms of like the middle or the like younger end of their target demographic like bracket. It represents what they're seeing in their immediate like vicinity. So for example, like if they're in middle school, it represents like what the high schoolers are wearing, or represents what their older sisters are wearing, which is a more immediate aspirational target than what, you know, a college age girl or a graduate is wearing, which is maybe what Barbie would kind of signify in her like accomplishments and her just being so like so established and set up and stable. The Bratz, by contrast, were they have their like core identities and they have like their personal styles and their personal taste, but there's still that flux and there's still that experimentation and flexibility that comes with adolescence and that comes with being a kid and wanting to explore and like just express yourself through fashion and materials and textures and trying new things and like yeah, like even things like thrifting and secondhand clothing, that that was factored into those like doll character descriptions I talked about earlier. And again, it reinforces that fact of like this is what the real teens are doing and this is what the target audience can see. It's happening in their life, like before their eyes. So it's more immediate and it's more yeah, it's like I think in that way it's quite exciting as well in terms of like, oh yeah, in a few years like I'll be able to go and thrift some clothes too in real life. And like it's so fun to kind of tap into this through the dolls because I can see that short-term goal right in front of me. So yeah, I think that's sort of summarizing a lot of I suppose you could say drama and a lot of obviously like controversy that goes with each like both doll brands I think have faced that. But in terms of summarizing the crux of the argument, which I feel is most sort of relevant to today's discussion, that is yeah, that's the heart of it in terms of like the positioning for each kind of doll like manufacturer and designer. So yeah, I think that's really just really interesting. And what is also interesting is that it doesn't like the story doesn't end there. The story is not just, you know, someone decided that Bratz are cooler than Barbie and then, you know, the end. It's kind of more nuanced than that. And I think the fact that it's still an ongoing like the story still unfolding is really interesting as well. So I think now would be a nice time to go into how because there's two avenues that I want to like discuss. I'm just trying to decide between them because they're both really interesting. One is kind of discussing that evolution from, let's say, the late 2000s and going into like the 2010s and the mid 2010s and the changes in the doll landscape in terms of like other competitors and sort of continual innovation and the importance for that in terms of like a beauty brand, which is what like as well as being a like commodity, it's also a fashion brand as well. And then the other avenue that I wanted to explore is like leaning into that idea of doll brands being fashion brands and the fact that Bratz's like recent like renaissance, I guess you could say, in terms of like their 20th anniversary and their 21st anniversary and what they've been doing on like social media and engaging with real like in terms of real human fashion brands and collaborating with them on the basis of Bratz and this other brand like it's different brands but like Y brand or X brand, and how that like reflects that thing I was saying about these dolls have influenced like Gen Z conceptions of like fashion and like what it means to be fashionable and like expression through fashion. So I think I'll do the first avenue first and then we'll do the second one because I think the flow might be like even might be more interesting to go that way. So basically, there's a lot, like, to actually sit down and unpack this. I think it would take like maybe 3 episodes of the radio show, but I think I'll just focus on the salient points. So in terms of Bratz in the 2000s, obviously the brand found a lot of success in terms of their approach to fashion, to doll playsets, and to like the importance of fashion within like a doll playset or a doll like pack. Like if it's just the doll you're buying, it's almost like the fashion is part of the USP of Bratz, and not just like an extra. It's part of that world building, and it's part of like it's even part of the character that you're purchasing, you know, as opposed to like maybe with a Barbie doll. Yes, the fashion would be like it would still come with the doll, like, and you might get a few like outfits to switch out as well. But while Barbie is fashionable, she's not sort of engaging with the creative practice of like finding out your style and expression and that sort of that whole sort of element of like the a more sort of the a more like creative edge to it. It's hard to explain, but she's more like she knows her style, and she's more like she's perfected it, whereas the Bratz are like with their fashion and with their like play sets, you can kind of still imagine them picking out what to wear and deliberating, and you can still see them having mixed and matched these styles based on their personalities and their personal tastes. And so that, I think, played a lot into the success, as well as, again, like using real materials like satins and like different details like ruffles or like trims, like little like satin trims on a dress, for example, and things like that. And yeah, that was something that definitely set them apart. And this is not even to mention the animated movies from both brands. Like that is a whole other discussion in terms of like leveraging an IP like in ways that the audience will actually engage with and will like cement itself into the like popular culture and by extension the nostalgia of that audience, which is part of why Bratz is like like Renaissance campaigns work so well. But yeah, I'm not going to dive too much into those animated movies because again, there's a lot to unpack. Even if you just want to like, yeah, there's just a lot to unpack. I'm not going to talk about like the series or anything as well in terms of Bratz, but just the fact that they were kind of coming at it from a more edgy, a more like we've got attitude, passion for fashion. We're like kids, like we're scrappy. We're making our way. We've got like our own fashion magazine. We're trying to get off the ground. We're building our way up to, not even up to, but we're just like building our way through life and like creating our way through like different circumstances that are relatable to the audience. And when we haven't like quote unquote arrived, whereas maybe Barbie can be seen to have arrived, even though I would argue that none of the two brands are kind of pushing that mindset of like it's not like a hustle culture. Oh, you know, yeah, we want to be successful. We want to like do this and that. It's just more the fact that one is more in a like adolescent life phase and one is more in a career, like established career / doesn't have to work life phase. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. But amidst all this success for Bratz and obviously for Barbie, like they've still maintained like a sizable share of the market despite this like disruption. And they did actually kind of take on the sort of edge and creativity and almost like girl next door, but still girl next door in the sense of like she's someone in your circle, your school, your street, your community, but she's still got like that edge, that attitude, that like personality and like fashionable flair that is distinct from like other people, I guess. They still tapped into that whole side of things through like their My Scene collections, for example. My Scene are like basically, if you think of an alternate universe where Barbie is 16 and she has other like friends and they like go to school, go to the mall, and they're kind of like living that life similar to Bratz, but not they're not like they're not like doing exactly the same as what Bratz were doing, but they're in that like bracket, that life phase, yeah. So they did that with My Scene, and they did the whole attention to detail in terms of the fashion, and the fashion being like part of the USP of the actual pack. They did that with their fashionista line, which is like fully articulated, like they can move the wrist, the elbow, the knee, and the ankle dolls. They had very detailed fashions and like boots and like bags, and their hair would have like highlights, and the styling of the hair would be like cut, like whether it's layers or ringlets and different things. And also with the fashionistas, they really leaned into having dolls of different ethnicities, different face molds, and not just like different makeup screenings, but like the actual features of the doll were different. So that was really really interesting and really cool. So yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack in terms of like what it means to create a doll brand and what it means to like come out with different play sets that explore different facets of like a slice of life, or even like fantasy element, like mermaids and princesses and fairies. But again, it's hard to go into that without taking up like how many hours. So just suffice to say, if you're not already familiar, there's lots of different fashion packs within Barbie and Bratz and other doll lines that might be like Barbie, for example, with her dogs at like a dog show, or Barbie like sleepover party, Bratz sleepover party, Barbie like engineer fashion pack, or like playset rather, or Barbie ice cream truck, like, you know, anything you can think of that might be like a snapshot of something that you could see in life. They kind of spin that with like a Barbie twist. So it's like Barbie as this profession, or Barbie in this moment of her life, or Barbie in this moment, like red carpet or whatever, or like Barbie as a fairy, Barbie as, and it doesn't even have to be linked to the movies, although obviously the movies are a marketing tool for the dolls. Like, that's a whole nother discussion, but basically movies and like cartoons and things like that are, more often than not, like one of the main goals is to like funnel people to buy the dolls and the action figures for the kids. But anyway, not entirely relevant right now, but something that happened that was interesting is that the Bratz, like, yes, they also had like their Bratz slumber party, like play sets, and they introduced new Bratz friends, and they introduced like prom, you know, play sets. They introduced like ski getaway, beach getaways, like going to Paris, going to Tokyo, going to London, like different things, and there's all this innovation in terms of the settings in which you can imagine those characters, and like remix the fashion and remix the the different things that come with it. But I think there was also a point where there were, and I'm not totally, you know, I haven't totally understood why this exactly happened, but I think there was also a point where other newer doll brands who had taken inspiration from Bratz, especially in terms of like the head shapes and the dimensions and the sort of attitude, they kind of took up the place in the whole like zeitgeist that Bratz used to occupy. And part of that might have been like maybe due to, there's a point where Bratz underwent like a redesign in terms of the doll molds, and like their head shapes were different, and like their fashions were a bit different too. They're a bit more, what word should I use? They were sort of more out there. Like they were more quirky, I think you could say, which maybe the company's research pointed them into that, in that direction, that yeah, this is what the audience wants. But I think it also left a gap in terms of like it was no longer what Bratz used to be in terms of like a person and their style and what they've picked out for themselves, and how they've kind of matched all the different things. It was more like a pack that had a style that was like deliberately quirky rather than like curatedly quirky, if you understand. So if you understand what I'm trying to say as a distinction. And I think within that, that allowed for doll lines like the LOL dolls. Like, I think LOL Surprise is the full name. But basically, if you Google LOL dolls, like, there's LOL dolls, right? And they're like these baby dolls. Like, they're fashion dolls, but a baby version, like small, like toddlerish ones. But what I actually meant to say was the LOL OMG dolls. So the OMG dolls are like LOL's oldest sisters, and it stands for outrageous millennial girl. And I think I'm not laughing at that. I'm just laughing at the like yeah, it's just a lot of memories. But basically, LOL OMGs really like took the scene by storm, and I think that had to do with a lot of factors. Number one being, not number one, but one of them being the whole thing I said about the Bratz and like the move towards a more quirky, more like, I don't even know what you would call it, but more like, you know how in like 2015 everything was like hipsterized and everything was like about like randomness, and this whole move to like quirky like pizza mustache type things, which I'm not saying it's bad. I know people like to like poke fun at it, but I don't actually think it's bad. I think it was a cute time. It was fun. But I do think that it's very different from what Bratz sort of used to be. And I think that sort of, from my understanding, it was like they tapped into that more, and that left a bit of a gap. And so there's that factor. And there's also the factor of like these other dolls called Monster High and Ever After High, which are basically like, again, they've got that larger head style and like very like tinier rest of the body apart from the head and the feet, which Bratz kind of initiated. But they kind of innovated on that in terms of like their worlds are like truly sort of fantasy worlds. Like Monster High is a high school for the children of like famous monsters in literature and films, and then Ever After High is a high school for the children of like fairy tale characters. And I think again what allowed them to really be successful is those two had films and like online web series and shows and books as well, and that allowed them to tap into the audience's attention through these other like this other media, especially with the rise of like YouTube and that becoming more ubiquitous in terms of the experience of being a kid nowadays involves YouTube so deeply, you know. And so there was that. But I think focusing on LOL, because even though LOL kind of had the same sort of attitude, focus, and sort of like exuding self-confidence and like almost like defiance, like yeah, that's how I kind of describe the approach that Bratz set in motion. But LOL did that for the YouTube generation. And by generation, I don't actually mean like a full, like whatever years I meant to encapsulate a generation. I just mean like kids who kind of grew up on that like scrolling through YouTube, like watching unboxings, watching surprise egg videos, watching like people open huge boxes full of these dolls and just compare them to like different collections and like mystery, what's it called, blind bags and all that. So I think they really tapped into what that looks like for that cohort. And they did that through, I don't think they had web series, but they definitely had like music videos for the dolls. Like it would be like animated and they had songs and like dances. And the songs really reinforce that sense of like, yeah, I'm here. This is my style. These are my friends. And, you know, that's what matters. And so I think in that way they were able to meet their target audience where they already were. And by doing that and being so ubiquitous in the space of like toy unboxings and like toy reviewers and kid YouTubers and stuff, that allowed them to gain a lot of popularity. And the fact that they're sort of the brand that they spun out of, which is that LOL baby doll, not baby doll, but like the toddler version of them, basically, the LOL surprise dolls. The fact that those dolls were like those ones where you like open, it's like a box, right? And the box is segmented like a TV dinner, and you open different sections of the box, and you've got these little like sachets, and you tear the sachets, and you get like a top, or you get some shoes, or you get a wig for the little doll, and you be like, bit by bit, like build a doll. You bit by bit piece together who this doll is, because when you buy it, it's like, let's say you're buying like the pink LOL, which there's nothing like the pink LOL. They're very specific, like aesthetics, very specific, like personalities. But for the example of this, demonstration, let's say the pink LOL. So you see the picture of the pink LOL on the outside of the box, but you open it bit by bit to like create the pink LOL. And I think that element of like co-creation and being involved in the like conceptualization of this character is also what really drove the excitement and the like the target audience wanting to buy more of these dolls, and like, oh, have you seen the latest one, like the latest collection? Because of course another thing that they did was they did different drops and different collections. So like there'd be one collection of LOL like dolls or OMG dolls that would be maybe different aesthetics, like one could be 90s hip hop style, one could be like 50s style with a twist, one could be like gamers, one could be like a gamer style, one could be literally anything. There was one called like, I think, Madam President or something like that, like Class Prez or something like that, and it's like that clueless movie type thing. So basically they'd get a select number of those that would be in a collection, and then they would drop that, and then you can collect them all, and then there'll be the next drop, and you get another set of girls who have their own styles, and like they're totally different. And that whole drop culture from like the fashion industry, especially like streetwear, they adopted that to great success, especially because of the format in which they sort of advertise them on YouTube, which is again those unboxings, those bulk surprise videos and all that. So LOL dolls, actually, I would say they're like the not successors of Bratz, in terms of like Bratz gave way to them and retired and was sealed away or something like that. All these brands are like concurrent. All these brands exist at the same time as one another, but in terms of the essence and the capturing of the zeitgeist that Bratz successfully pulled off, LOL to me is the doll brand that kind of did that again. And maybe you could argue that like Monster High also did that in the like early 2010s, when this whole like newer sort of more eclectic could be a word to describe it, but this more sort of out there kind of approach to fashion was coming up. You could argue that Monster High tapped into that, but I think in terms of combining that with the rise of YouTube as a key sort of marketing channel for the toy industry, I think LOL did really well in that. And yeah, like even to this day, LOL OMGs, although I've not sort of seen as much hype around them, again, like that whole flywheel of spiritual successors to different like challenger doll legacies and challenger like fashion doll legacies. You see like Rainbow High, for example, is very popular, and they've got a web series which is on, I think it's also on Netflix at the moment, and they again have those large heads, and they've actually got different body proportions to the other like Bratz successors. They have a like more proportional body structure and more, I think, more realistic as well bodies than the others, and that, I think that also plays a part in in terms of like what the audience experience is like while playing with the dolls. Like again, it's adding to that relatability and that more immediate like, oh yeah, I can connect with this girl, this character. And but they also combine that with the like the out there-ness of like, you know, your Monster Highs or your Ever After Highs, because a lot of the dolls, like they might have like silver skin or turquoise skin or pink skin, you know, because that's just how the world of Rainbow High is. Like you've got a range of different skin tones that you find like in reality, but then you've also got people who like are just, I don't know, just exist in that world, and no one, it's not an unusual thing. So yeah, you've got that, and like obviously like the pink hair or like floor length hair. You've got anything you can kind of dream of. You've got that mixed in with the relatability of the molds, mixed in with the kind of, again, that big eye thing of, because it's like a psychological thing, right? Like the bigger heads, the bigger eyes, it's kind of communicating a sort of infant like, sort of not harmful, sort of relatable in terms of the target audience's age. That whole thing is communicated, so it kind of balances out the edginess of the fashion and the kind of sophistication of the fashion. So you've got that, right? And then, yeah, they combine that with the whole YouTube marketing, and they combine that with also, I think they leverage the personalities of the actual dolls a lot in terms of like the series and character development and things like that, which I think younger audiences are coming to really hold brands more accountable for. Like even in like normal television, like kids shows and stuff, like kids do pick up on things like character development and the quality of the story and just different things like that, which can't really, or shouldn't really rather, be taken for granted when trying to build a beauty brand using these like products. So yeah, and yeah, there's a lot to unpack from that, and it's again just looking at how the Bratz like 20th anniversary in 2021, how they really leveraged Instagram for their campaigns of like showing the Bratz girls, like in their teaser they showed the Bratz dolls like animated like in their high school graduation photos, which was so like, I think that encapsulates a lot of the success of that campaign, because number one, the fact that they're animated and they're not showing the actual footage of like physical dolls is really effective, because the generation that grew up on like the Bratz TV show is used to seeing Bratz conceptualized in this 3D animated way, right? But the genius behind this is that they combine that with modern, like the developments in animation since then, so that you can see that their hair is moving a lot smoother. You can see that they're the way they're kind of designed and the way they're moving is a lot more, like a lot smoother and a lot I guess it just comes with like time and like development of technology, right? But the fact that we can kind of see them in this way, it's almost like completing the star image. It's like, oh yeah, it's it's doing, not doing them justice, but you know what I mean. It's like it's satisfying to see them sort of rendered in this way, and in this like, given the new developments and the capabilities that we now have, it's satisfying for the audience because they're like, oh wow, like look at them now, like, you know what I mean. It's almost like that reunion. Yeah, I think that's exactly like what that campaign was about, like reunion. Like, these are your friends. Like, we missed you. Like, that whole thing of like, we've both changed, we've both grown up, but we're still into fashion, we're still expressing ourselves. And you can see that in that animated teaser, because the fashion was like modeled off of like famous looks by stars like Ariana Grande, or even just styles that the team had come up with like on their own. But it's like, it was very much 2021 fashion. But the fact that it could be 2021 fashion and still be Bratz fashion is so telling of the impact that Bratz's fashion has had on the kids who are now like the arbiters of that whole like fashion flywheel at the moment, you know? Like all the kind of silhouettes and the cuts and the designs and the shapes and the asymmetrical, you know, things, or the ratios of like maybe the bottoms to like the tops in terms of like baggy trousers and like a top that's more like cropped or more angular, things like that. Like the fact that you can kind of map the Bratz fashion packs onto these trends is, I find it so cool. Obviously, it would be a bit maybe oversimplistic to give one brand all the credit for this, how things turned out, but I do think that been an influence of there's been influence, you know, even in the makeup styles, like I think especially in that whole 2016 to maybe 2018 era, like the trending sort of Instagram makeup look, you can definitely see the connection to the Bratz like makeup screenings. And yeah, so the whole campaign for like the 20th anniversary, it really taps into that whole nostalgia factor, the reunion, and leveraging the fact that you can see Bratz like in real life, because you can see people who look like the Bratz dolls. And that's not just in terms of the fashion, that's in terms of like what they chose to do in terms of representing different cultures, different ethnicities. And I think that really taps into the feeling of togetherness and relatability again, like even all these years later. And yeah, they did that. They leveraged that even further with like collaborating with real fashion brands and like real designers in the fashion world to design things for the Bratz and have the Bratz model them, or the Bratz doing literally the Bratz dolls doing influencer campaigns for fashion brands. Even if like you're not buying like a doll top, for example, they would still do that. Like it would still be effective. So I think that was so cool. And just the fact that they did their 21st anniversary as well, like the fact that it's the 21st birthday is such a culturally significant one, especially in the US. The fact that they also tapped into it for their campaign was cool. So yeah, a lot to unpack there, and I could keep talking, but yeah, we will save some for another episode. And this has been me on BRAIDAR, the business of beauty. So thank you so much, and I will see you same time next week. Bye for now.